me introduce you to the first session and our amazing panelists. The topic we're going to be talking about is supercharging your recruitment and hiring of top talent in the new world of work. We're joined by our veteran who's here with us many times, Anna Mindeloff. Welcome back, Anna. Good to see you again. Chief People Officer over at Fiskars. We're joined by Nina Kitlitz, who's the Vice President of Senior Talent Acquisition Consultant at First Citizens Bank. Hey, Nina, thanks for joining us. And we're also joined by Jury Chitayat, Chief Technology Officer at Safeguard Global. Welcome, everyone. How are you all? Thanks for joining. Are you feeling better now, Anna? I know you're recovering from COVID, so I hope you're feeling a lot better today.
Yeah, I am. Thanks for asking.
Thanks for joining. Well, let's just jump straight in. I'm going to come to you first, Nina, if that's all right with you. You know, the challenge of hiring talent has increased significantly, especially over the last couple of years, due to the great reshuffle, resignation. It's got many names at this point. How are you designing a better hiring process to build your global talent community?
Well, we definitely have had to adapt in this market. I mean, the way that I see it is I feel like we had this big storm and we didn't know how big it was until it was over and we could assess the damage. The experts could weigh in. That's kind of where I feel like we are at today is, you know, we're left with a talent pool where 50% of the talent pool has changed jobs in the last year. So we've tried to focus on what we could control. I mean, obviously there was a lot of things outside of our control at this time, and we just went through a market we've never seen ever. I mean, you know, higher than average turnover, not with just our organization, with everyone all at once happening all at the same time. So we focused on what we could control. Some of the things that we did was, you know, we took our offer time in half. So from the candidate time period to offer stage, we cut that in half. So basically, if managers normally in a normal market would interview a candidate with 6 different people, we advise that they cut that in half, and we would cut our time in half. And then the other thing that we did was, you know, some of the offer process would take a bit of time as well. And candidates, as you know, were coming. You may talk to them, you know, at the beginning of 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they have multiple offers, and then they receive counter offers. So we cut our time to offer in half, also with the pre-approval. So if they go through the first interview, we feel pretty confident about them, we'd go ahead and get the offer ready. That way they complete the 3rd interview and we have the offer ready to go once that decision is made. So that's helped us time frame wise. We also work with our HR business partners and our comp teams so that they could, you know, understand the market, understand that the compensation levels have been driven up as well. And they put a framework together. So we had an understanding ahead of time what we could work with, what we could do, what we couldn't do. That also helped us in terms of time. So we felt like we, you know, weathered the storm pretty well, and we're prepared for the next one.
So do you think that it's only a matter of time and how fast you can be, or speed, or is it more a matter of getting the right candidates in?
It was still obviously getting the right candidate, but I mean, we just didn't have the luxury of time to spend as much time to find the exact right candidate. So we had to be a bit more flexible. I mean, that was important to be a bit more flexible. I mean, in you know, 2.5 years ago, that would be different. We would definitely take our time, but time was not our friend in this case.
Yeah, I think everyone is facing the same challenge, more or less. At least it's the same from my side on being fast when doing the offering, and it's almost annoying when they have several offers, and of course they should choose working with us. I mean, we are the best company to work for. All of us think like that, right? But that's the tricky part, to be fast enough with a good enough offer.
It's interesting. How did you improve the communication side as well? Because that's something that I saw some of my friends, family members get quite frustrated. They were interviewing virtually, the lack of communication and clarity of where they even were. I actually had someone call me recently who I helped kind of get a job interview somewhere, and they're like, Chris, what do I do? Do I follow up with them? I haven't received any emails. But that also is a tough part to do when you're doing it all virtually. How did you overcome that?
I mean, I think communication is always an issue. I mean, you know, with what we've gone through or not, communication is always important to over communicate, make sure you're working with the candidates to let them know where they're at any given point in the process. But I think even candidates were having a hard time with communication because we would have calls and they thought they were talking to somebody else and they would call us somebody else. So
Oh, no way. But they've got so many in their calendar.
yeah, you know, so it was hard on both parts. I mean, they had a lot of balls in the air. We had a lot of balls in the air, and we were, you know, on the same playing field. I mean, the other thing that happened too was, you know, you weren't getting applicants. So your applicant flow completely dropped. And it dropped because people did not need to apply. They were being tapped on the shoulder continuously about other jobs. So, you know, we were looking at candidate flow, and it just completely fell off.
Yeah. It's interesting how I saw a shift of companies as well. All of a sudden, the use of platforms like LinkedIn shot through the roof to try and get in front of these candidates as well. I saw like hiring managers doing selfie videos and posting them on LinkedIn. I saw all sorts of innovation and interesting things. I even saw, you know, Bjorn, one of your colleagues, Yuri, at Safeguard, doing a video on LinkedIn saying you're now hiring and seeing people apply that way. So companies had to become really innovative to compete and stand out during that time. There's sort of this intersection between HR and marketing.
Yes.
You know, getting closer and closer together. I actually saw HR departments hiring marketeers into the HR team, which they never really had before as well. So it's really interesting.
That's right. But I think one of the interesting things is also that there's been bifurcations of different models. So I think form follows function. And so organizations have had to decide what kinds of talent they want to be going after. Are they looking for top talent? Are they looking for more talent? Are they looking for less expensive talent? In all those respects, people have had to get creative. So there's been innovation regardless of whatever you're going after. But there's different sorts of approaches that people are taking depending on which one of those things they consider most important.
That's a good point. I think I'm also trying to look into skills more than specific experiences. So I'm looking into what's the skill that is closely connected to what I'm actually looking for, but maybe it's a person with an experience from another function or another unit or another kind of industry. And we're actually tapping into that instead of everyone looking for, I'm in the retail industry and you don't necessarily need to have that experience in order to be successful, right? So how can we rethink the skills needed for the different positions for the future to actually create the talent pool also for the future?
You mentioned, Yuri, a little bit about the personalization side, because that's been a big focus. You know, how do you personalize the candidate experience and offer them what they want in today's new world? I think almost candidate experience means something different now than it did a few years ago.
Yeah,
that's right. Especially if you're going for top talent. So if you're designing a industrialized process, you're gonna go, I want to get people in the door as quickly as possible. You know, speed is everything, and that's really important, especially if you're at scale. But if you are looking for top talent, people need to be treated with a certain degree of personalization. So this starts with, for us at least, we started with understanding the candidate from day one. So that doesn't mean they go through the ringer, they go through several rounds of interviews and then they meet the hiring manager. The hiring manager is actually reading their resume before the candidate has their first contact with us. We then read their GitHub pages or anything that we could get our hands on about how they've worked online. So you know, some of the people that we were working with are PhDs, and we want to have at least read a little bit about, you know, what kind of publications they've put out. And then when you're first introducing yourselves to them, it's not a conversation where it's, you know, tell me a little bit about your background. It's, I've read a little bit about you and I find this thing that you've done so fascinating. Tell me a little bit about that. It's that's a bit about the sort of personalization that you need to bring to the conversation, because that's something that is an investment that they don't see other kinds of companies putting in.
That's
and it's
brilliant,
a way to differentiate yourself.
How have you formalized the process around that?
For us, it meant we had to deconstruct our recruiting process to take recruiters out from a filter and into a strategic advisor. So get the right sorts of candidates, try to understand exactly who they are, and then get the hiring manager to be as early in the process as possible. In fact, the hiring managers become, it's not their side of desk job, it is their priority. So they need to be as early and on top of it as possible. Another thing that was really important for us is investing in analytics. So understanding the market, understanding what people want, and then cultivating a job offer or a job prospect, something that we believe says we can offer you a better job. It's not just we can offer you more money, or here's a couple things, the benefits that we think is important about us and trying to sell them on us, but trying to really cultivate a unique value proposition for this candidate.
Did that require a lot more training? How did you roll that out in practice?
In practice, we needed to change a lot of our policies. So we did one thing called Work in Any Way, which basically means it allowed hiring managers and teams to customize how they worked, even the number of days that they worked for their team. Other things that were really important was giving some education to the hiring managers. So for instance, about the different talent markets, what things people would be expecting. What works in one country doesn't necessarily work in another country. So adapting to that, and also being open to different working models. So some people want full-time employment, some people want to work contract, and educating people on how their teams could adopt different sorts of workers to be able to still do the job the best.
It's so interesting because depending on the team that they join, that may be different, right?
Precisely. Yeah. It means that we become, instead of a uniform thing, we become a patchwork. But that diversity leads to some innovation, which I think is also another good thing. It's a little bit harder to manage, and it's perhaps something that takes a little while for people to wrap their heads around. But on the backside, what we've seen is benefits to the way that the teams think, the speed at which you can scale, and also the quality of the talent you get in the door.
I think one of the biggest topics at the moment is how much remote work, hybrid work do you actually allow in different talent groups or in different companies even, or units. Do you have any thoughts about that? Surprisingly
to me, there's the top filter is not actually the team or the company, but the legislation of the country. So some countries allow for a lot more flexibility than others, but once you get past that, it's the team that decides and we tend to pod people up in small groups of 8 to 10. It helps that we're in tech, so that's a way that people are used to working. So that's some examples.
More the agile.
Yes.
The agile thinking. Yeah, that's great. Actually, I think it's in the business. I mean, we have people in retail, in stores. We have people in production sites. We have office people. So we have a lot of different groups of people, and of course, not everyone can work remotely. But what we are trying to do, and what we are struggling with at the moment, is to find talent who actually wants to be on site in a specific office, because the company is built in a way that we still go to offices, and that needs to change for the future, right? So how do you then set up smaller offices where we can collaborate and then tap that into the talent pools, that the people that we need to reach and we want to have in place? So that's sort of for the future, how that will look like and how it can be an attractive employer for all kind of groups. That will be one of the challenges, I would say. The personalized offer, like you are talking about, Duri, I think we are all struggling with that right now. How can we become attractive just by offering something else, which is personalized for different groups without interfering with current employees that are used to have it in a specific way today? Yeah.
I think a lot of that starts with what you said earlier about actually starting with understanding who they are and communicating that from the very, very beginning.
Absolutely.
Like, that surprises me. We're a small company, so I always do that, but I suppose I have the luxury of time. I don't have thousands of employees. I'm not hiring that many, but whenever I speak to someone, I actually would never speak to a candidate for the first time without actually, I hired someone on our editing team a while back, and I watched their show reel, right? And I watched a short movie they did, and we had a conversation around the short movie that they shot, and they were really excited. They couldn't even believe that I took the time to watch their short movie. But if I get the best talent out there,
Yeah.
invest the time in doing that, and then when they asked me how do we work, for example, the working model, I was like, oh, actually, it depends on the team you work in. They're like, what do you mean? And they were like really surprised, but I was like, yeah, it depends. If you're working in the content team, it's this. If you're working in production, it's that, etc., etc. And they were like, wow, so you actually customize it to the individual? Like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And just those two things alone, the knowing that I took the time to know who they are beyond just the job title and cared about their work and took the time. And secondly, I was like, what's the best way that's going to work for you and how you work? That goes a long way to whether they decide whether. So when it comes to being in the office, there needs to be a reason why they have to be in the office. It can't be just because I want you to be in the office.
Right.
This is how we work. Here's the benefit of being in the office, and here's what we're going to be doing. That's the conversation that needs to be had. I still see a lot of my friends I always pick on finance, but they're typically a big culprit of this, of you need to be in the office just because, my wife works in the office in finance, and now she's back. And it was 2 days a week. Now it's 3 days a week. And recently it's 4 days a week. We can see the trend of where this is going. But most of the time she goes into the office, she's not actually collaborating with her team. She's just sitting in a cubicle somewhere.
Yeah, which makes it unnecessary and demotivating to be at the office. It's better to be there to meet the people, right? And to meet your colleagues and do some collaboration.
Yeah.
But I think it's challenging for many companies because you have big offices around the world that are more or less empty. Of course, managers want to fill them because you want activity there, you want to meet the people, but that's not always what the talents want.
Yeah. You also got to take their family into consideration.
Yeah,
right?
But they can't move them into the office. You can't move all the families into the office, right?
Yeah. It's like the impact of Natasha going back was that we now had to get childcare. We need to change and shift our working hours to make that work. But personally, how to do that. So when you think about your top talent, you also got to take all of those things. And especially after the last 2 years, people have settled into a new lifestyle.
Yes.
And it took a lot of effort. We all had to rethink how we live life and make new schedules and create new habits. And then all of a sudden you turn that person, you want them to change that as well. So there's a lot of things that come into the equation. Definitely. What about you, Nina? How are you seeing that on your end?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tightrope walk right now. I mean, you've got, the business that has one idea, they want people back in, and then you're dealing with the talent pool who they're all over the place. I mean, there are some candidates who took jobs where they were fully remote, and now they're regretting it, and they would really prefer to have an office to go in when they want to. They're missing the people component. So it really is a balancing act. And I think, if we can build in the flexibility around that, not, have some guidelines, but also have the flexibility so that you can cater to the talent. You can, actually meet both demands on both sides, with people in the office, people having, their flexibility as well.
I may be a little bit extreme in saying this, but I believe that sometimes when people need to see people working, if it's just simply to see people working, it exposes how you think about the people you're working with. You think that they're lazy, not trustworthy. If you weren't on top of them, they wouldn't get the job done. And I just think that's not a great way to run a successful business. I think if you want to run a successful business, you have to hire the best talent. The best talent knows how to work best, and you need to trust them. And sometimes that means that they're going to want to work from the office. They might want to get together as a team. If they're a remote team, they might once a quarter, they might want to get together and meet each other. Remote doesn't necessarily mean free. It doesn't mean cheap. It just means remote. So adapting the way in which you work to trust the way and investing in it, I think that's just the way that we have to move if what you're prioritizing is top talent.
Yes, I would agree. completely, but I think it's a challenge. A lot of research now shows that it's the people plus 50 who actually wants to force people back to the offices. So the mindset shift needs to come from my generation to say that it's okay to work remotely, 100% remotely if necessary. It's up to us to make us more attractive for the talent so we can make them as productive as possible. But and talent is global, right? So you can use the top talented people that you can find in one specific niche can sit anywhere, at least according to what I think. So that's a mindset shift needed for the top executives in every single company to think differently and not having themselves as the role model for how to behave and how to lead.
And I do think there are some advantages to having that time in the office. When you're online, you have to schedule appointments usually, or you're jabbering or chatting with someone. But when you're in the office, you have those impromptu conversations that just come out of nowhere. And so we kind of feel that, that in-person experience is valuable, especially for the managers and the more junior or early career people as well for their mentoring purposes. But we also feel, it's another way to connect with somebody when you have a human being, a three-dimensional person versus the screen. You're in a room by yourself all day or whatnot. But to really connect with your coworkers, to go have lunch, you have that community, you're bonding, you're connecting. And the sooner people can connect, the better retention you'll have.
That's such a good point, right? Because you could have the best talent in the world, but if they don't feel like they're part of something bigger than just them, a community or a culture, they're going to leave. I'm wondering, Jerry, what are you hearing from your clients? Because you're literally helping, companies all over the world with this challenge as well, and helping them recruit in multiple locations. What's the main feedback you're hearing from them?
I think oftentimes organizations are struggling with friction. I think that there's immense amount of friction to be able to go after global talent. So whether it's analyze, recruit, hire, manage, or pay, every single step in that journey, there's a great tool for it. But in between those different tools, there's a HR person that has to glue it all together, or a hiring manager, or someone in finance. And so a lot of what folks are looking for is ways to simplify and try to make things more self-service and easier.
Yeah, I think that's what we all want to get to. We also have to understand, like you just said, those tools, they don't solve all the problems. There's not like a tool you can just plug in and all of a sudden, that's despite all the sales pitches you've all been getting, there's no tools that come in and just change that. It's a culture change that needs to happen across the organization.
That's another important point, which is that if you're going from an organization that is used to hiring people within 50 miles of their headquarters to hiring people all across the world, you're going to get different types of people. So you say best talent, but people are different in different places. And so how do you look at culture fit? How do you look at the kind of communication skills that people are going to have coming in and what you'd expect of them? How do you set expectations about how people behave with one another? These are all complex challenges because human beings are different and complicated, especially when they come from different cultures. So building an organization that respects those differences and tries to treat them as something that helps your organization, as opposed to a negative, something that you want to kind of fit everybody in a particular box. I think that's something that all organizations struggle with right now.
Do you think that's also the same reason that those people are leaving?
It's a lot of different reasons, but I would say that mattering matters, right? So if you can get the feeling that the company and the HR, the line managers actually do care about you as a person, that sort of will help you to retain people and the right people in the organization. The culture add is super important. The culture fit, less important if you want to develop the company, but everyone needs to feel that they belong to the organization. And that goes for the talent pools that we are creating too. So you make it possible for them to feel already when you start to meet them that they could be a part of the organization and the journey ahead, so to say.
And I think with with exit interviews, they, you know, not everybody is completely honest when they meet with an HR person or with hiring managers before they leave. They want to leave that door open. A lot of them do. So they don't necessarily say the actual real reasons why they're leaving. So sometimes you're going to get correct information, sometimes not.
Yeah, it's quite true. If they're disconnected and then in the first place, then why would they be open to share?
Right.
The amount of, I would say the vast majority of my friends that I've spoken to that have left businesses never really fully explained why. And I think you're right. And maybe that's just my group, but they were like, I didn't feel like I even deserved to even give them that feedback because of the way I felt I was treated. So then why am I going to sit here and do that, which is a shame, obviously.
But Chris, remember the former panel we had? You should not have exit interviews. You should have stay interviews.
Yes, exactly.
People are staying instead.
100%. Yeah. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for everyone, Anna?
Yeah. So we have been talking in the last panel I was in with Chris. We had one of the more senior persons when everyone presented themselves saying that I've been working with talent management for 10 years. This lady told us she has been working for 35 years. So everyone was a little bit quiet after that. And she actually wrote the book and created sort of the concept with having stay interviews in the US and always having that talk. The talk that matters before people are even starting to think of leaving. What would make you stay? And then create the journey ahead from that interview, saying this is what we can meet and this we can't meet, but we hope this will help you stay and we understand your sort of concerns and meet people instead of just leaving it and not raising the question, and then you will end up in an exit interview instead.
It was so cool, right? Because even when you feel like that person's super engaged, it's even more important to have that conversation. Where are we? Where are we going? What are you excited about? What can I do? Yeah, but we only wait until there's an issue to have a conversation. And how nice is that, right? To have a conversation, a stay interview with someone. I'm sure HR leaders will a lot prefer to have stay interviews with those leaders and then not have this surprise. Because a lot of the times as well, I find that when people leave, it could have been avoided. So many of the times have been avoided. Something simple. It was just a lack of communication. I actually had a member of my team. I had a meeting just before we did this today where we had a miscommunication. And I went for a quick walk in the park, literally half an hour before we went live. And I realized we just weren't on the same page. And it was just a lack of communication. And we were both like, oh, you thought that? And I was like, oh, you thought that? Oh, we're actually not too far away. We just did the community, and we're like, okay, and now we came back, everything's fine, we're good, and here we are. But a lot of times these things can be avoided, and doing that up front and having those stay interviews is a great tool. Schedule those, do them quarterly. You'll have a great success. That's a great way to retain top talent as well. Because I've been in companies before where I've decided that I'm going to move on, and they've asked me, what is it you wanted? And I've said this. They're like, yeah, we can do that. And I'm like, what? I assumed that wasn't possible, and therefore I looked for opportunities as opposed to actually have a conversation. People would rather look outside for new opportunities than actually go to their leaders internally and have that conversation, which is crazy.
Exactly. Creating that internal talent market instead of just looking outside. So that's one of my biggest goals for the coming year, is to really make sure that we have an internal talent marketplace in place so people can have an internal career and take the next step. And also creating those talent pools internally in a little bit different way than before, tapping into the skills and the wants. What is it that people actually want to do compared to only looking into experiences and the positions they held before.